What's up, squad? This is Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wanted to talk about the latest deal between Brazil and Vietnam. I thought this was really interesting because it was so unique, but I think very indicative of times to come. Of course, I believe in a tripolar world with the United States in the West, China and India making up the three primary pillars of this new world. They are the markets, they will be the dominant productive capacities within the world. And each one of them have their own unique strengths and weaknesses. But these are going to be the great three markets that operate in the world. And so I don't think it's such in the past where you have one side or the other, but you have these multifacets as the world catches up. I feel as though after 1500, the West really sped ahead, each century getting even more advanced than the next. And then, of course, with all levels of development and advancement, it's only like so far you can go until others start to pick it up and grab onto it. And that came through pretty much, you can say, market liberalism. As people trade, they gain exposure to other groups, and eventually they'll say, "Oh, I like that," and they incorporate it. And sometimes when they incorporate it, they can do it better, or they can put a twist to it that allows them to do something different but more valuable, etc. And that's what happened as America, as we came out of colonialism and these imperial fears, which one can say that the British were top tier as far as trade and exposures. But even then, they weren't runaway winners, right? And you saw that with the World Wars. America, it was the United States who didn't have an empire, but had at its disposal a vast array of resources, along with a liberal mindset. But instead of trading with countries, America was large enough to trade within its states. And that pretty much propelled America to the forefront of the great power race, especially being a region where they didn't have too many competitors in this arena, surrounded by what you can say is empty Canada, late to the race Mexico, or basically small islands or drastically smaller islands, smaller countries, smaller than states. Like you could put some of these islands into states. So with each other. So that being the case, America was just had this massive capacity to do things, and they had the right mindset. And now we're getting in a place, and especially when you look at countries like China, like people talk about, obviously the Chinese government are really big on their Chinese socialism, but you look at South Korea and North Korea, like the fact East Asian especially work ethic is so phenomenal. These guys can make communism work. Like you look at a country like imagine what China would look like if it actually embraced market liberal policies. They would be off the hinges. I actually think their core form of socialism, it works for them, so be it. But these countries have such vast potentials, and that brings me to the story today of Brazil and Vietnam deepening the relationships. And these are basically, as I said, in this relationship is very indicative. Usually you see a major trade breakthrough, and it's usually one of those countries with another. Brazil and with a major power, such as Brazil, United States make a trade deal. China, Brazil make a trade deal. Vietnam, China, or Vietnam, United States. Usually that kind of the bipolar world we kind of inherited coming out of the communism, the communistic or the fall of the Soviet Union in the late 80s, early 90s, and that repercussion, and it was always, are you first world or second world? Are you Western market or liberals, or are you socialists? And then coming out of that, America kind of had the number one spot, but China became this productive hub that just by sheer size alone, it started to take up market space. Now you get to the point now you have all these countries growing. You have a country such as Vietnam. Vietnam is about the size of New Mexico. So it's relatively big for a state, small for a country. It's not a very big place if you look at it on a map. Very thin, and it's populated with 100 million people. 100 million people, and they get down. Vietnam is known for its tenacity, Vietnam War. Again, the Vietnam War is a great example. But the Vietnamese are known for their tenacity, their hustle, work ethic. So Vietnam is basically chasing their economic growth rates, trying to develop their country. And they don't necessarily align with China, who had a great historical anonymity for whether Chinese dynasties or outside dynasties such as the Mongols ruling China. So you have this animosity between these two neighbors of China and Vietnam, which is not easy to pass. They do work on some trade, but that's pretty much out of necessity. They do have great disputes with the South China Seas, etc., and drawing the lines there. Same thing with Vietnam and America. Vietnam and America, they fought a very brutal war, and Vietnam, and justifiably, Vietnam character is defined by this defiance of fighting off larger countries and their ability to do so, being a more diminutive sized nation with vastly I wouldn't say inferior, but yeah, pretty much what their resources don't measure up in any shape or form or scale against the United States. So it was just sheer tenacity, stick to itness that a country like Vietnam has maintained its independence. And they didn't lose half of its country like Korea did. So Vietnamese are very proud of this fact. So either way it go, with the race heating up in the Pacific and China's rise in the West trying to hold ground, countries like Vietnam, many Asian countries are kind of getting squashed in the middle. And what you're seeing is they don't see it that way. They say they're basically accepting their lane is their lane. And they're not in a rush to align with China. And they're not in a rush to align with America. And this is shown by this deal that Vietnam just made with Brazil. President Lula da Silva is making his rounds over there. And pretty much Vietnam has just made a deal to get, they're buying some planes, I think about 10 planes from Embraer, the aerospace company of Brazil, and they're having some meat processing plants invested in and built by JBS, a Brazilian meat processor, one of the top in the world. So you see that Vietnam is building this relationship with Brazil and going outside of the two dominant powers in the world. Conversely, you see a country like Brazil. Brazil is one of my sleeping giants. It's two of them. Brazil and Nigeria. Like these are countries that drastically underperform their potential and capacity. Brazil, number one, though. Brazil is a behemoth. If you look at the statistics, about half of South American geography and demography lies in Brazil alone. Like Brazil pretty much owns South America, and, but it's it own it spatially wise, and they have such access to such resources. One of the largest countries in the world. They're continental size, as I say, these big countries. They're a continental sized country. These guys have so many resources available to them that they can dominate almost any industry they get because they have this tropical area that's pretty much more tropical area than any other country you can possibly think of. So they have this massive rainforest. They also have temperate zone climates, which allows them to balance their trade offset. This is something the United States do not have. The United States don't have a tropical climate per se, at least not continental United States, where they can balance these things off. So Brazil has this readily accessible. They just need to, but Brazil remains a laggard economically on a per capita basis. For good reason. They're having a good time down there. So they are, but they still have a lot of opportunity that they can fulfill with that large, massive country. So it's great to see them going out there, being active, and growing their trade network internationally, not being overly reliant on the U.S., not being overly reliant on Europe, I mind you, as well, which some South American countries tend to do. They say Europe or United States. But this is really outside the box trade. Vietnam is going to get them a large population of people, more populous than any country in Europe outside of Russia. Vietnam is going to give them a large population of people that can buy their goods. And Brazil is going to give Vietnam access to a bunch of rich land, which they can import products and do business with because Brazil is so capital rich. So you're marrying this Vietnam, which is people rich, with this Brazil, which is capital rich, making a perfect relationship. And neither one of these are heavily aligned to China, United States. China, United States isn't even a part of this deal, or Russia, or any of those names that you're so used to hearing. So that's really why I like this deal, because it's so off the rails. It's so indicative of the world we're going into. It's so visionary by its leaders to reach out and build this bond. And it's definitely a sign of things to come. So I really appreciate the story. I thought it was a great story. It's really interesting to see how things evolve in this ever-changing world of the 21st centuries, especially with so much chaos going around and people trying to change the sphere of influence. But those are my thoughts. Love to hear yours. Comment below. Of course, like, share, subscribe if you're enjoying the content. Check out some of our content at Amazon Store. You know we have our geopolitical jigsaw puzzles out there. More products coming soon. Thank you so much for your time. Until next time, Bantu up.